Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to start, now that we've got our 4 different bits of software set up, the Agisoft PhotoScan, 3ds Max, XNormal, Unity 3D, and we've downloaded the Site Viewer project file, which includes some external scripts, and we've configured the 3ds Max external script to point to XNormal. If you haven't done that, then please go back to the first tutorial and that will explain how to set everything up ready to begin. For this one, we're going to just start with our nice PhotoScan model. So it's pretty big, I imagine, 9 million points, so 9 million polygons. This would run, well, it wouldn't run at all. On the iPad, it would die. There's no way that iPad would happily process this in the form that it's in at the moment. So let's have a look at cutting it up and seeing what we can do. So we start with our very big file. And the first thing that we do is let's duplicate this chunk. Alright, and it doesn't really matter what it's called, so that's fine. I'm going to decimate the mesh, and I mean it's pretty big, so I might cut it 50,000. We'll see what it looks like at 50,000. I might make it 60,000 actually. 50,000 is fine. We'll see how it looks. So it's just going to go and take this enormous 9 million polygon mesh and reduce it down into a 50,000, so it's sort of softening out detail and reducing it down into something which is not going to have as much, it's not going to look as detailed. That's okay, because the next stage that we're going to do is a process of reprojecting that detail from the high geometry model, the the detailed geometry, the high polygon count model, back onto the low poly, what we could call the low poly proxy. So the low poly proxy for the original model that will have textures applied over the top of it. And these textures, it's not just the way that it's not just the color in the texture. There are textures that are applied that make it bump out in a particular way, and that that apply sort of lighting to it that make it respond as if it had that original detail there. So looking at it, it's probably a little bit too, just trying to figure out whether it's too low poly. What I might do is make another duplicate, and I'll have an experiment maybe with decimating it down to, let's say, 80,000. Oops. Oops, I think I just I applied that decimation to the wrong one. Let's try that again. Okay, 80,000. So it takes a while to go through this process, and actually you don't necessarily have to do this decimation process in PhotoScan. You could use another bit of software to do it where you've got a little bit more control, but it's built into PhotoScan, so we'll use it and see how it goes. So sorry for the delay while we're waiting for things to process. Let's have a look at that. So that's 80,000. think for the sake of the demonstration, we'll go with that and see how it works. So now that we have, I'll just delete this other chunk that we're not using, remove that one, yes. So we have a high poly, this one, and our low poly. And what I will do is export, just start off, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it Creek. And the conventions that I'm using for my naming, I will call the high poly model high and export that out. And once this is done, I'll export out the low poly model and just call that low and put that in that directory. At the moment, I'm probably not going to edit the time gaps in this, so feel free to skip ahead. I might get the opportunity to cut them out, but we'll see. I may just upload these videos raw for the moment with the gaps of waiting around for things to process, and then maybe if I have time, come back to them and modify the videos just to cut out these sections. It does give you a good idea of how long some of these things can take, although the machine that I'm running on is a very powerful machine. It's one of iVEC's workhorses, which is quite nice, to say the least. It's a good machine. One thing that I've thought about when making these tools, you can actually run these. There are some things that you can do if you don't have access to a powerful machine. You can run a version of PhotoScan and these tools using Amazon Web Services on a powerful machine that you remotely connect to. And actually the way that I've set up these tools means that you can generate the envelopes based on the low poly version, and then copy those envelopes across to your remote machine and let the more powerful machine use those envelopes to process the high poly version. So I probably won't get time to go over that in more detail, but if you want, I can discuss it as a possibility. So okay, I have my low poly, I'm just going to call it low, it's going to be much faster. There we go. And now I can close PhotoScan. Oh, I will actually save it. But while that's saving, I can go into 3ds Max. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that I'm in 3ds Max is just open a empty setup. I'm going to import the, what did we call it? Creek. I'm going to import the low. So this is going to not be too demanding on the machine. I didn't export any textures. I suppose I could have. I might apply. This isn't something that you need to do, but it's just sort of hard to see at the moment. There we go. Okay. So here's our model. Let's take a look at it. Here's our low poly model, and what we want to do is to cut it up into little sections that will be small enough that there's fairly high resolution texture on. We can make lots of them actually. The decision for how big your sections are is sort of fairly arbitrary, but I think because we're going to apply a 4K texture over the top of them, we probably, if we want a reasonable amount of detail, we want a section sort of that big to fit the 4K texture over the top of it. Otherwise that texture is going to start being a little bit low resolution. So by the looks of it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. Maybe I'll get sort of 12, maybe 15 sections out of this. Let's have a look at what we can do for making those sections. Okay, so the first thing to do, go into your Max Script and Max Script editor, and if it's not already open, open the where do we have it? Open the site viewer folder that you downloaded from GitHub. Go to Assets, External Scripts, 3ds Max, Export Tools, and then select the export tool. It's open at the moment, so we don't need to open it again. Then hit Control E to run it, or you can go to, I think, Tools, and the command is Evaluate All. So this pops up, we can minimize this now. This pops up these sets of tools that we'll be using. And we start doing what I'm going to call building envelopes. These envelopes are basically little sections that we will use to cut up our model. So let's go into this view again, and I'm going to draw a box. Let's see, just roughly, it doesn't really matter. Okay. I'm going to make the box slightly, so I'm just going to go press M to go into materials. I'm going to select a new material. I'm going to set its opacity to maybe 40, and I'm going to make it maybe a funny color, maybe a bit, oh, that's a bit of a gross color. Okay, oops. And apply it to that box. Might make it a little bit more opaque actually. Okay, so now we can see through it and we can kind of get an idea of, I'm using Alt and middle mouse button at the moment to rotate around. We can sort of get an idea of what is included within this box. I'm going to go to rotate. You can get to rotate with the E key as well. And I'm going to move it around a little bit. Let's have a look at what we've got. So what I'm going to do is just place this initial, I'm going to size this box up. Oops. Be careful not to move your model. It's very important that it doesn't move because it's the sort of reference point for where everything else is. Here's my box, let's say, all right. Now that I've got my box here, also I'm going to change the modifier to work in local so that it's along the dimensions of the box rather than the world. There we go. Okay, so we've got our box here. We kind of want to make it so that when we start copying our box, it will fit neatly into this section here. So what we can do is go to this button here, which is the modifier, and we'll make it a bit longer. Make it a fair bit longer. And just rotate it to the point where everything sort of fits nicely into that section there. Okay. So we have it. Yep, that looks all right. That does look okay. I might make the box a little bit higher so that, and pull it up a little bit. Let's see, so that when we move it over here, everything will still be included in it. Okay. Okey-doke. So if you're not used to 3ds Max, the controls might be a little bit annoying to get used to, but it's a fairly versatile tool, which is why I'm using it, and it's quite easy to write scripts for and to do various 3D sort of bits and pieces. Okay, so I have my envelope now. I've just made it very, very long so that we can get an idea of how it's going to fit in here. It's like about 20 long, which probably means, how long does it need to be to fit everything in? So it's 15 maybe. Okay, it looks like 16 could be good because that's a nice, easily divisible number. So let's say 16 units to fit across, and let's actually cut it into segments of 4. So we'll make it 4 long and just place it there back in the corner. Okay, so now it's set up. There's logic to what I'm doing. Let's set the height. What is that? 4.5. We can actually set it to 5 because it's not so important. And the width, how's that? Okay, brilliant. So here's my first envelope, and the first way that these tools are helpful is that we can come along, right? So that's the Y dimension. If we say this thing is 4 units long, so if we shift it 4, if we say 4 in the Y dimension, we have our box selected, and we hit copy and shift. Oh, actually that moved it in the wrong direction. So I just need to come back and say -4 instead of +4. What that will do is copy the box and shift it along a little bit. Alright, so now we have 4 boxes. If we select those ones, we don't want to shift it by the Y anymore, we want to shift it by the X. So if we say, how wide is it? It's 3 units wide, so if we say -3, then we hit shift and copy, and it copies them, and then we'll do it, well, I'll select these 3 because we don't need that section there, that won't have anything in it. We select those 3 and we just do it one more time. That's annoying. There's one section there that won't fit, but that's actually alright. What we can do, select, I haven't actually done this before, but there's no reason not to do it. We'll make one more copy, and just for this box we can modify the size of this box. It's just that little sliver of section. I'll make it 8. Oops, let's undo that. I just wanted to modify that section. Is that going to be a problem? Oh yeah, it is. Okay, I'm going to clone this as a copy, and where is the original? So all of these are instances, which is why when I change one they all changed. I've just copied this. I'm going to name it and deleted the other instance. I'm going to call this box 12, and I'm going to make it a little bit longer. There you go. So now that's going to get the last little section there. All right. So very important at this stage to save the envelopes. Save as, just go to the folder that we created before, Creek, and I'm going to call it envelopes. It doesn't matter that the low poly mesh is still there because it's very small, it's not a waste of time. And now what I can do, the next bit of this set of tools, is to select all of the envelopes that we want to apply this thing to and hit Boolean and export. Alright, so now we're given the dialog to create or to find or a folder that we want to export these sections out to. I'm going to create another one called low, where I'm going to put all of these low poly bits and pieces in, and another subdirectory that I'm just going to call untextured. And the reason why I'm doing that, oops, I didn't spell it right. The reason why I'm doing that is because in a minute we'll create textured versions of these. So if I hit OK, it's going to pop up with a little export dialog. This is just setting the properties for all of the rest of the export. So this is just these settings will be applied to the export of all these sections. So if I just hit export, then it will use those sections, and you see it's going pretty quickly through, cutting up all the sections, and bam, export done. So I'm going to use another tool that you may or may not have, but it's pretty useful. Meshlab. It's just a very fast little tool for viewing meshes. You can find it if you just search for Meshlab. And now let's have a look at what we've created, because there's a possibility, actually, there's one thing that I didn't do. That's a bit remiss of me. So here's the little cut up section. I've gone into the untextured folder. I'm just pulling things in. One thing that's really, you see we've got this little sort of orphaned section off here. Actually what I'm going to do is delete all of our untextured boxes for the moment, and go back and do something that I should have done in the first place. So if I open our envelopes folder again, here are all of our envelopes. I'm just going to select them and turn them all off for the moment and do something to the original low poly mesh. And it depends on your mesh how useful this is, but it's probably a good idea just because of the way that it cuts it up to do this, to make it a bit cleaner. So I've selected the mesh, go to my modify button and hit the elements button. If I click that, all of the single element will be selected, and then if I go to edit and invert, all of these little orphan sections pop up, and if I hit delete, then they get removed. So that just cleans it all up a little bit. And now if I make these visible again, and let's do the same process again. So Boolean and export the low poly. I'm going to creek, low and untextured, and just export for the settings. That's going to run through and export all of those bits and pieces. Now if I go into my Creek folder, low untextured, let's have a look in, oops, that's annoying. I'll just delete this bit, the old one. Okay. There you go. So the reason why this little section is here is because it's not orphaned, it's part of this continuous mesh. It's just that we cut off the bit that joins onto the rest of this, which is fine. But it makes, to do that process of deleting some of the orphan sections, just makes it a little bit, perform a little bit better, less likely to have weird results when we do that Boolean cut up process. So we've got our low poly sections all cut up. Now let's do the large poly, and this will take quite a while for various reasons. We've got a very large mesh that we're about to load, and it's going to drive us nuts. So let's open the envelopes again because we're going to need these. We can delete that low poly mesh. Now what we want to do is, well, actually we'll load the high poly mesh now. If we go to import and select high, you can see it's a gig, so it's going to take a while. It's 9 million polygons. It's probably going to be quite an involved process. What I'm going to do is just show you how to start this process. It will run through happily in the background. It's a batch process, so you don't have to be there. You can leave it running on overnight, or if you are running this process on a virtual machine, like a nice powerful virtual machine in Amazon Web Services or something, then you can just leave that running and then log in later on and have a look at what the outcome is. So it's really nice to have this set of tools that just automates all of these things. Otherwise you're sitting there sort of manually going through the process. I did actually the Trafalgar Street tunnel reconstruction that I made, I did have to sit there and manually go through the process of selecting all of the parts, cutting them up, importing them, and that was a nightmare. Actually, it was not a fun process. Okay, so here we have the nice, very, very large. If we press 7, then it tells us how many polys, 9 million polys, a bit more than 9 million. And, you know, probably even on this machine, well, it's not too bad actually. This is a crazy powerful machine, so we can quite happily sort of like move around it. But if this was anything other than this crazy machine, then it would be like really, really having a hard time to look at this. So it's nice to be able to set up the envelopes in the low poly version and then just sort of leave it to do its thing on the high poly version. So what we do is select our envelopes, hit the expand button. What that does is make a little bit of an overlap. So for the next process, there won't be any like shadows, there won't be any bits where the projection is just cut off on the corner. The overlap just gives us a little bit of room to breathe. Yeah, it's pretty much a good idea to do. So I've expanded these envelopes out, and now they're all still selected. You'll see that they're called high. Let's rename them to high. And we don't want to use the Boolean and export. That would probably crash actually with such a large mesh. We want to use this cut and export. So if we hit cut and export, we go to Creek, we create a new folder called high, and again we'll make a subfolder called untextured, and let's go. So again it pops up with the export information, and now it's running through. Let's see how long it takes to do one section, because I have a feeling I have a feeling it will take quite a long time. So I'd like to get to the point where it does one section, just to give you an idea of how long it takes. Here's the folder that it's going into, so we'll see when that updates. Also what we can do is look at the resources that this thing is taking up. Let's see, yeah, so this is a very powerful machine, as you can see. It's not hugely CPU intensive, this process, but I've got a feeling if we look, where are 3ds Max, 8 gig of memory for this thing. A little bit more maybe. So you could probably just about get away with running this on a fairly powerful machine. In total, it's using about 30 gigs, so you'd probably need about 32. I guess you could just about get away with it. And it's done the first export. Great. So if we look in the folder, you'll see it's created this first one, and we might as well have a look at it in Meshlab. I'll just delete this mesh that's already created. Pull this one in. It's 100 meg, so it will take a little bit of time to load it up. There it is loading in the background. And here's our high detail cut up section. So you can see in this view actually there's a little bit of a noise in the reconstruction, on the surface of the reconstruction. There's a little bit of sort of guesswork here, but these sections, it was quite a rough and quick, as you can see from the location of the cameras. It's not very comprehensive coverage, so it's not got very much. It's just got sort of triangulation from 3 or 4 different locations. A little bit of overlap from these, but not very much displacement. So it's actually a surprisingly good reconstruction considering the few points that I was taking images from, which explains why it's a little bit sort of noisy. But this bit of the surface works okay. So in the background, it's just, all right, it's done another one. And I will start the next video. I'll stop the video now and just wait for it to finish processing. And then the next tutorial will be starting with the next stage, which is going back into PhotoScan and projecting nice high resolution textures onto the sections that we've got. So at the moment we had, we didn't have, I don't think we had it. Yeah, I had a little bit of texture on the original model. If we go back into the high poly version, then you can see it, the textured. I think it gets annoyed slightly when 3ds Max is doing a fair bit with PhotoScan on at the same time. You can sort of see that there's texturing going on. This is about to crash, by the way, because I think, yeah, the graphics card gets a little bit unhappy. But you can see that there's a texture applied to it. I think it's about a 4K over the whole lot, but what we're going to do is take all of those little chunks, and there's, I think, did we come up with 12 or 13 chunks? And we're going to apply 4K textures to each one of those. So the resolution is going to be quite good. That's going to be in the next video. And yeah, I hope that it's been fairly straightforward so far. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post in the video or email me, and I'll be happy to respond.